The wind howled through the barren trees as I stepped off the train, the chill in the air biting through the fabric of my coat. A heavy mist curled around the platform, swallowing the edges of the station in an eerie, shifting haze. In the distance, beyond the tracks and the skeletal outline of the woods, the silhouette of the Abbey loomed, a hulking structure of darkened stone and towering spires, perched upon the lonely hillside like a relic of a forgotten age. I tightened my grip on my bag and exhaled, watching my breath curl into the night air. The letter had been specific. Sister Evelyn was dead, but not by her own hand. If that was true, then I had come to uncover a murder disguised as faith. As a private investigator, I had seen my share of dark secrets, but something about this case felt different, older, more insidious. The request had been urgent, the details sparse. Someone inside these walls wanted the truth to be known, but they feared speaking it aloud. That alone told me how dangerous this place could be. A solitary car waited near the edge of the platform, its driver hunched against the cold. As I approached, he barely spared me a glance, tipping his hat in silent acknowledgement before gesturing toward the open door. I climbed inside without a word, settling into the stiff leather seat as the engine rumbled to life, the tires crunching against the frostbitten ground. The ride was long, the silence between us punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the occasional bump of the uneven road. The mist grew denser the closer we drew to the Abbey, the world narrowing into a tunnel of shifting white. I could feel the weight of the place even before I saw it up close, a sensation of something watching, waiting, hidden beneath centuries of whispered prayers and unspoken sins. As the car passed through the heavy iron gates, the full scale of the Abbey revealed itself. The high walls stretched endlessly in both directions, enclosing the vast estate in an unyielding embrace. The main building rose at the center, its Gothic architecture sharp and severe against the storm-laden sky. Light flickered in only a handful of the windows, suggesting that much of the Abbey was shrouded in darkness, its secrets locked away from prying eyes. The vehicle rolled to a stop before the entrance, where a lone figure waited. A nun, her habit swaying slightly in the breeze, stood with hands clasped before her, face shadowed by the cowl of her veil. As I stepped out, she inclined her head slightly, her voice soft but firm. "You are Miss Price." It wasn't a question. I met her gaze, noting the sharpness in her dark eyes. "I am." She nodded once, then turned on her heel. "Follow me." I did, my boots echoing against the stone pathway as we ascended the steps. The great wooden doors groaned as she pushed them open, revealing the dimly lit interior beyond. The scent of wax and aged parchment filled the air, mingling with the faint chill that seeped from the stone walls. The nun led me through a series of long corridors, holding up a candle that cast flickering shadows along the towering arches. She lowered her head slightly and murmured, almost to herself, "Don't mind the darkness. The power is out again." After that, the silence remained unbroken. Shadows clung to the vaulted ceilings, stretching like unseen watchers above us. There was a heaviness here, a solemnity that went beyond mere reverence. It was the kind of silence that concealed things, secrets buried beneath the weight of devotion. Finally, she stopped before a wooden door, turning to face me. "This will be your room for the duration of your stay." I studied her carefully. "And Mother Agatha?" Her expression didn't change. "She will see you in the morning. Until then, I advise you to rest." I didn't move. "What exactly happened to Sister Evelyn?" A pause. Then, with the faintest tightening of her jaw, she said, "She passed on under tragic circumstances." Before I could press further, she stepped back into the corridor, pulling the door shut behind her. The lock clicked softly, the sound unsettling in the stillness. I exhaled and set my bag down, taking in the small chamber. Bare stone walls, a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a single crucifix hanging above the door. Spartan, impersonal. It could have belonged to anyone. I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The courtyard stretched below, empty and still. Beyond it, the outline of the bell tower loomed, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. A chill ran through me, though I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Sister Evelyn had been found dead at the base of that tower. And if the letter I received was true, someone had made sure of it. I turned from the window, my resolve hardening. Whatever had happened here, I would uncover it, even if the Abbey itself tried to keep its secrets buried. I moved toward the single window and peered outside. The courtyard below was empty, save for the shadows of the surrounding cloisters. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a bell tolled, though I could not tell from where. I exhaled slowly and turned back toward the room, my mind already racing through the events that had brought me here. Someone had wanted me here. Someone had risked exposure to send that letter, warning me that Sister Evelyn's death was not what it seemed. But who? And why now? Had they exhausted every other option before reaching out to me? If so, it meant I was their last hope, or their last mistake. The air felt heavier now, like it pressed inward from all sides. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter again, my fingers tracing the ink as if touching the words would somehow bring me closer to the sender's fear. A sound outside the door made me pause. Light footsteps, almost imperceptible against the stone floor. I set the letter down and reached for the small knife I always carried, a habit formed long ago in my line of work. I wasn't expecting immediate threats, but caution had kept me alive this long. A soft knock followed. I hesitated before answering. Yes. The door creaked open just enough for a figure to slip inside. A young woman, dressed in the traditional habit of the Abbey, shut the door behind her, casting a wary glance toward the hallway before turning to face me. Her eyes darted about the room, her posture tense as if expecting someone to lunge from the shadows. "Ms. Price," she whispered. I sat up, studying her. "That depends on who's asking." Her hands trembled as she gripped the fabric of her robes. "I wrote the letter. I'm Marianne." She gave a small nod, glancing again at the door as if expecting someone to appear. "I didn't know if you'd come." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But you were convincing. You said Sister Evelyn didn't kill herself, that they wouldn't let the truth leave these walls. Tell me what you know." She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line before she spoke. "Sister Evelyn found something. Something about Mother Agatha, the abbess, about the Abbey's past. She was afraid, but she wouldn't say why, not outright. She told me she had written it all down, in case something happened to her. Then one night she was gone. They said she jumped from the bell tower, but I don't believe it. I know she wouldn't." I crossed my arms. "You think she was murdered?" Marianne's eyes flickered with something between fear and certainty. "I know she was." A chill ran through me. "And the journal she kept? Do you have it?" She swallowed hard. "No. It disappeared the night she died. But I know where she hid things. If it still exists, it will be there." I grabbed my coat. "Show me." Marianne hesitated, wringing her hands. "We can't go now. The others will see us. But after matins, when most are asleep, I'll come for you. I'll be ready." She nodded, casting one last glance toward the door before slipping back into the hallway and vanishing into the shadows. I let out a slow breath, sitting back onto the edge of the bed. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, but I needed more. I needed proof. I stared at the candle's wavering flame, my mind replaying the way Sister Marianne had glanced over her shoulder, the way her fingers had curled so tightly into her robes. She wasn't just nervous, she was terrified. Terrified enough to risk reaching out to a stranger. I moved to the window once more, peering into the dark courtyard. A figure passed by, too distant to make out details, but there was something about the movement that struck me. It was purposeful but not hurried. Someone who belonged here. Someone who was watching. Had Mother Agatha started to suspect my identity? I quickly dismissed the thought. If she had, I wouldn't have been allowed through the gates so easily. Before I arrived, Marianne had made sure to conceal my real purpose, introducing me as a visiting believer. If Agatha had known my true intent, she would never have let me step inside. That realization made everything clearer. Sister Evelyn and Marianne had secretly reached out to me, bypassing the authorities because they understood that the power held within these walls extended far beyond the Abbey itself. Reporting this through official channels would have only led to silence, or worse. That was why they needed an outsider, someone they could trust before it was too late. I needed answers, and I had a feeling that when the time came, getting that proof would be far more dangerous than I had anticipated. I lay awake long after Sister Marianne had left, my mind weaving through the possibilities. The journal was key, it had to be. If Sister Evelyn had documented something damning, it explained why she had been silenced. And if Marianne was right, then that journal was still hidden somewhere within these walls. The Abbey's silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant tolling of the night bell. The darkness here felt heavier than any I had known before, as if the shadows themselves were listening. At last, I heard the soft shuffle of footsteps outside my door. A gentle knock followed, barely audible over the hush of the stone corridor. I moved quickly, pulling my coat tight around me before easing the door open. Marianne stood there, her eyes darting nervously from side to side. "Come quickly," she whispered. "We don't have much time." I followed her through the dimly lit hallways, our steps careful against the cold stone floor. The Abbey seemed larger at night, its hallways stretching endlessly into the gloom, the flickering candlelight unable to push back the darkness entirely. "Where are we going?" I asked under my breath. "The old library," she whispered. "Sister Evelyn told me once that if anything ever happened to her, that's where I'd find what she left behind. There's a hidden chamber, one even Mother Agatha doesn't know about." We turned a corner, pressing ourselves against the wall as the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Marianne held her breath, her grip tightening on her robes. A shadow passed, slow and deliberate. The figure, another nun, paused for a long moment before finally disappearing into an adjacent hallway. Marianne let out a slow breath. "They're watching," I muttered. She nodded. "They always are." We reached a heavy wooden door, its iron handle worn smooth from years of use. Marianne produced a key from the folds of her robe, inserting it into the lock with a soft click. The door groaned as she pushed it open just wide enough for us to slip inside. The library was vast, its towering shelves disappearing into darkness. The scent of old parchment and candle wax filled the air, and dust floated lazily in the dim light from the high, narrow windows. "Where's the chamber?" I asked. Marianne led me past the rows of ancient texts to the farthest wall, where an ornate bookshelf stood apart from the rest. She pressed her hand against one of the carved wooden panels, feeling along the edges until her fingers found what they were searching for: a nearly imperceptible gap. With a quiet effort, she pressed against it, and a section of the bookshelf gave way, revealing a narrow passage beyond. I let out a breath. "Clever." She motioned for me to follow, slipping through the opening. I stepped inside, the air instantly cooler, the space feeling untouched for years. A small writing desk sat at the center, illuminated only by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through a high, arched window. Scattered papers lay upon it, and atop them a small leather-bound book rested, worn but intact. Marianne's fingers trembled as she reached for it. "This is it." I took the book from her hands, flipping through the pages. The ink was hurried in places, smudged as if written with shaking fingers. My eyes skimmed the entries, descriptions of unease, whispered rumors, warnings unheeded. And then, near the final pages, I found the passage that made my breath catch. I saw the letter. Mother Agatha's letter to the bishop. She wrote of her growing unease, of the things she had been asked to overlook. But I know it's more than that. The visits from the bishop are not about faith. I have seen the bruises, the fear in the eyes of those called to his service. I have seen the ones who disappear. I turned the page, my pulse quickening. Tonight, I will write everything. I will not be silent. If they find me, if I do not wake in the morning, let this be proof that I was right. Let this be the truth that they tried to bury. I looked up at Marianne, her expression tight with grief. She knew, and she was killed for it. A sudden noise from outside the chamber made us both freeze. Footsteps, coming closer. Marianne grabbed my arm, her voice barely audible. We have to go. Now. I tucked the journal inside my coat, pushing the bookshelf back into place as we slipped out of the hidden chamber. Just as we stepped into the library, the door to the corridor creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted against the dim light. Mother Agatha. And she was not alone. Mother Agatha stood in the doorway, her presence a dark shadow against the dim candlelight behind her. Two other nuns flanked her, their expressions unreadable beneath their veils. Marianne stiffened beside me, her breath coming in shallow gasps. What are you doing here? Mother Agatha's voice was quiet, but the weight behind it was suffocating. I took a step forward, careful to keep my composure. Sister Marianne was showing me the library. Mother Agatha's cold gaze flicked between the two of us. At this hour? She folded her hands before her, as if in silent prayer. I believe you were told to remain in your quarters. Marianne remained silent, her hands clutching at her robes. I met Mother Agatha's gaze evenly. Curiosity got the better of me. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence in the library was deafening. Then, Agatha shifted, her expression hardening. Curiosity is dangerous in a place of faith, Miss Price. You would do well to remember that. A flicker of movement caught my eye. One of the nuns at her side, Sister Beatrice, reached into the folds of her habit. A warning? Or something worse? You knew Sister Evelyn, didn't you? I asked, my voice measured. A muscle in Mother Agatha's jaw twitched. She was one of us. Until she wasn't, I said. Until she became a problem. Marianne sucked in a breath beside me, but I didn't waver. I needed to push. She found something, didn't she? Something that couldn't be ignored. And she wrote it down. Agatha took a slow step forward. And what exactly do you think she found? I glanced at Marianne, then back at Mother Agatha. The truth. Silence. Heavy, unmoving. Then Agatha exhaled through her nose, the corners of her lips tightening. Miss Price, I think you have overstayed your welcome. She motioned toward the two nuns beside her. Escort our guest back to her quarters. I will see to it that she leaves in the morning. Marianne reached for my hand, her fingers cold. But I held my ground. I don't think the bishop would want that. Agatha stilled. The mention of him had the desired effect. What do you know of the bishop? I tilted my head. Only what Sister Evelyn wrote. That she saw things. That she understood what he was doing. That you knew and chose to stay silent. Agatha's face remained impassive, but her eyes were furious. You have no idea what you are speaking of. Don't I? I took a deliberate step forward. You protected him. You protected his visits, his desires. You made sure his victims stayed quiet. And when one of your own saw too much, you made sure she was silenced too. The room felt colder now, the weight of my words hanging between us like a storm about to break. Marianne was trembling beside me. Enough. Agatha's voice was sharp, but not as steady as before. This conversation is over. Sister Beatrice moved first, stepping toward me. I didn't wait for them to grab me. I took Marianne's arm and stepped back toward the door behind us. Come on. You are making a mistake, Miss Price, Agatha warned. No, I said, my pulse hammering. I think I'm finally seeing things clearly. Without another word, I pulled Marianne with me, and we darted into the hall. The moment our feet hit the stone corridor, we ran. The sound of footsteps followed behind us, but I didn't dare look back. We had what we needed. Now, we just had to survive long enough to reveal it. Our footsteps echoed through the cold, empty corridors as we ran. The flickering candlelight cast long, jagged shadows on the stone walls, distorting our figures as if the Abbey itself were trying to hold us in place. Behind us, the measured steps of Mother Agatha's nuns followed. Not running, not chasing, but advancing with a purpose that sent chills down my spine. "This way," Marianne whispered harshly, pulling me down a side passage. We ducked into a narrow alcove, pressing ourselves against the cold stone as the footsteps passed. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything but the overwhelming instinct to run. Marianne's fingers tightened around my wrist. "We can't go back to our rooms. They'll be waiting." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Then where?" She hesitated only a moment before whispering, "The crypt." I frowned, but before I could question her, she was already moving. I followed, keeping close as we wound our way through the labyrinthine halls. The scent of damp stone and old wax thickened the air as we descended deeper into the Abbey's foundations. A chill settled into my bones that had nothing to do with the night air. The entrance to the crypt was hidden behind a heavy wooden door at the base of a spiraling stone staircase. Marianne fumbled with the latch, and the door groaned open just enough for us to slip inside. The air beyond was thick with the scent of dust and age. I closed the door behind us, plunging us into near darkness. The only light came from a small, barred window high above, casting weak silver beams across the rows of ancient tombs. Names and dates were etched into the cold stone, many of them too worn to read. Marianne turned to me, her breath uneven. "They won't come down here." "Why not?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Because of what's buried here." A shiver ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" Marianne walked slowly to the farthest tomb, her fingers grazing the stone lid. "This is where they put them. The ones who disobeyed." I exhaled sharply. "The missing sisters." She nodded, and for a moment, the silence between us felt heavier than the walls themselves. Then, before I could speak, she took my hand and pulled me toward the back of the crypt. She pressed against a section of the wall, and to my shock, the stone gave way just slightly. "There's another way out," she murmured. "A passage that leads beyond the Abbey walls. I found it years ago, but I've never dared use it." I reached into my coat, pulling out Sister Evelyn's journal. "Then tonight's the night. We need to get out of here before they decide to come looking after all." Marianne hesitated, her gaze flickering over the journal. "If we leave, we can never come back. Would you want to?" I asked quietly. She swallowed, then shook her head. Without another word, she pressed harder against the loose stone, and with a quiet groan, it shifted, revealing a dark passage beyond. A sharp noise echoed from above, the creak of the crypt door. A flicker of candlelight spilled in. Someone was coming. I grabbed Marianne's hand. "Go!" We slipped into the hidden passage just as the heavy footsteps began descending the stairs. I pressed the stone back into place behind us, sealing off the crypt just as the voices of Mother Agatha's nuns filled the room beyond. We had escaped, but we weren't safe yet. The passage was narrow and damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. Marianne and I moved as quickly as we dared, the flickering light from my small lantern casting eerie shadows along the walls. The stone beneath our feet was uneven, ancient, as though we were walking a path forgotten by time itself. Behind us, muffled voices echoed through the crypt, distant but persistent. They had discovered our absence. "How much farther?" I whispered, my voice barely carrying. Marianne swallowed hard. "Not far. The passage leads to a gate beyond the Abbey walls. If we can reach it before they figure out where we went. A sudden noise from behind made us both freeze. A low scraping sound, like stone grating against stone. I turned, holding the lantern high, but saw nothing except the black maw of the tunnel stretching into darkness. Marian tugged at my sleeve. We have to keep moving. We pressed on, winding deeper beneath the Abbey. The walls here were lined with old relics, crumbling statues of saints, half-eroded engravings, remnants of a time when this place had been more than a prison for its inhabitants. The weight of history pressed down on us, thick and suffocating. Then, suddenly, the passage opened up into a small chamber. At its center stood an iron gate, rusted but still intact. Beyond it, through the bars, I could see the faint glow of moonlight filtering in from the outside world. Freedom was just a few steps away. Marian rushed forward, her fingers fumbling with the latch. It stuck. I pushed beside her, but the metal was unyielding, rusted into place by years of neglect. There has to be a way. A sound from the tunnel behind us sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Footsteps. Rapid, purposeful. They're coming, Marian gasped. She turned frantic eyes toward me. We can't let them take the journal. I scanned the chamber quickly, my mind racing. Then my eyes landed on an old wooden beam resting against the wall. I grabbed it, wedging it between the bars, and threw my weight against it. The rusted metal groaned in protest, but it didn't budge. The footsteps were getting closer. Marian joined me, desperation fueling her strength. The beam cracked, but the metal gave way, snapping open with a screech that echoed through the chamber. We stumbled forward, tripping onto the cold grass outside. The air was fresh, crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating dampness of the tunnel. But we had no time to stop. Marian grabbed my hand. Run! We sprinted into the darkness, the weight of the journal pressed against my chest. Behind us, a figure appeared at the mouth of the passage, Sister Beatrice. Her veil was torn, her breath heavy, and in her hand, she held something glinting in the moonlight. A knife. I forced my legs to move faster, my pulse thundering in my ears. The trees ahead promised cover, a chance to disappear before the Abbey's reach could pull us back in. This way, Marian gasped, pulling me toward the dense forest beyond the clearing. We had escaped the Abbey, but we were still being hunted. The forest closed in around us, its skeletal branches clawing at the sky like twisted fingers. Our breath came in ragged gasps as we pushed forward, the damp earth sucking at our feet. Behind us, the crunch of twigs and shifting leaves signaled that Sister Beatrice was still in pursuit. Marian clutched my arm. We need to hide. I scanned the darkness, searching for anything that could shield us from view. Then I spotted it, a fallen tree, its massive trunk partially hollowed by time and decay. Without hesitation, I pulled Marian toward it, pressing ourselves into the shadows beneath its gnarled roots. We crouched there, silent, as the sound of hurried footsteps drew closer. Sister Beatrice emerged into the clearing, her breath labored. The moonlight illuminated her face, contorted with fury and desperation. The blade in her hand caught the pale glow, glistening like ice. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. You think you can run from this? From her? Her voice was raw, almost pleading. You don't understand what you've done. Marianne's fingers dug into my wrist, trembling. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. Beatrice took a step forward, then another. Her knuckles whitened around the hilt of the knife. Mother Agatha was trying to protect us all. The bishop, he's powerful. If this gets out, if you expose this, he will burn everything to the ground to keep his secrets buried. I tensed. Then why are you protecting him? The words escaped me before I could stop them. Beatrice's head snapped toward our hiding spot. Damn it! She lunged. I twisted away, shoving Marian back as Beatrice's knife sliced through empty air where I had been. She stumbled forward, and I seized the moment, grabbing a fallen branch and swinging it with all my strength. It connected with her wrist. The knife flew from her grasp, landing somewhere in the thick underbrush. Beatrice let out a guttural sound and charged again, but Marian stepped between us. "Stop!" Her voice cracked with emotion. "This isn't what Sister Evelyn would have wanted." Beatrice froze. Her chest rose and fell with each breath, her expression a war between loyalty and doubt. Evelyn was trying to save us. Marianne continued, desperation breaking through her voice. She wasn't the enemy. The real enemy is still inside that Abbey, pulling the strings. Do you really think Mother Agatha can protect you from the bishop forever? A long silence stretched between us. Then, slowly, Beatrice's shoulders slumped. Her eyes, hollow and lost, flickered to the journal clutched against my chest. "Go," she whispered. Marianne hesitated. "Beatrice." "Go." Her voice cracked, but the rage was gone. Before I changed my mind, I didn't wait for her to say it again. I grabbed Marianne's hand and we ran. The trees thinned, and ahead, through the swirling mist, I saw it, a narrow dirt road leading away from the forest. Freedom. As we reached it, Marianne turned back, her face pale with something between relief and sorrow. What will happen to her? I exhaled shakily. She made her choice. Now we make ours. Together, we disappeared into the night, the weight of Sister Evelyn's truth pressing heavier with every step. The reckoning wasn't over. It had only just begun. The road stretched before us, bathed in the eerie glow of the moon. The chilling night air stung my lungs, but I didn't stop running. Behind me, Marianne's breathing was ragged, her steps uneven as we pushed forward, deeper into the unknown. Finally, when we could no longer hear the footsteps of our pursuers, we slowed, doubling over to catch our breath. The weight of the journal in my coat felt heavier now, as if it carried not just words, but the burden of every life stolen within those Abbey walls. Marianne straightened first, her eyes flickering with both relief and fear. "We can't just keep running. What do we do now?" I swallowed, still feeling the burn in my throat. "We take this to someone who can expose it. The authorities, the press, whoever will listen." She hesitated. "You think they'll believe us?" "Believe her?" I pulled the journal from my coat and held it up. "They'll have no choice. Evelyn recorded everything. The abuses, the bishop's visits, Agatha's complicity. This isn't just a story. It's evidence." A gust of wind rustled through the trees, and with it came the distant chime of a bell. Even now, even with Agatha's lies unraveling, the Abbey continued its rituals, its long-held silence draped over it like a funeral shroud. Marian shuddered. "I don't want to go back. Ever."